So welcome to Let's Talk About the Deep Stuff. I'm Sean Kneese, your host, and in today's episode, we're exploring a subject that's maintained its relevance over the years and once again has captured global attention, which is the ongoing narrative between Israel and Palestine. And joining me today is Najla Said.
Najla Said, yes.
Palestinian American author, actress, playwright, and activist. And through her literary and academic work, she's confronted racism, stereotyping, and social and economic inequality, and the specific challenges that face immigrant and second-generation Americans. Her father, Edward Said, was a pioneering scholar, author, and advocate who dedicated his life to challenging Western perceptions of the Middle East, notably through his groundbreaking work, Orientalism. And through, okay, so sorry, like the script was before with two people, so I'm kind of like,
it's okay. Well, I know you can also edit, so it's not.
Yeah, I can edit. It's not live. Good thing it's not live. Yeah. So to start off, before we get into current events, can you share some of your insights into your personal journey as a Palestinian American and how it's influenced your work as an author and activist?
Sure. I was born in America, so that's the first thing. My mother's from Lebanon, and my dad, as you said, was Palestinian, born in Jerusalem in 1935. He came here at the age of 14 because he got kicked out of school in Egypt. So he was born in Jerusalem, but they left in 1947 to go to Egypt, but they were unable to return to Jerusalem. So they stayed there in Cairo, and then my dad was kicked out of school. But my grandfather had already come to America and become a citizen. He just had moved back to the Middle East to start his family. So my father was born with an American passport, thankfully. And he also came from a Christian, well-to-do family. I'm not going to lie about that, because I think that also will shape our discussion about the current events in terms of social class and things like that, which seem to be forgotten, because there was an entire Palestinian society. It wasn't just refugees, obviously, when my dad was there. So he came to America, he went to boarding school and then to Princeton and Harvard. He became a literary critic and is well known for being in his work a literary critic and a scholar of 19th century British literature being his expertise. So he's a Palestinian who's an English professor. And when he achieved a certain amount of success, he started speaking out about Palestine and the Middle East in general and all the issues going on in the Middle East. The book that you mentioned that he wrote, Orientalism, he wrote it when I was 4. It basically opened up a whole new field of study, which is very normal today. People talk about stuff like this all the time and they don't know where it came from. But the idea that the other, what we know about, specifically he was writing about the East basically encompassing anywhere east of Europe, all mushed together, is all made up with sort of fantasy by the West. It's been defined and created. All the images, whether belly dancers or genies or, you know, terrorists even, is sort of from the Western imagination, and there's never been an understanding of what the actual culture is. So I grew up in New York City on the Upper West Side because my dad taught at Columbia. So most of, well, when I was a little girl, I went to a school that was all girls, and it was not, there weren't a lot of Jewish students there. So they were very waspy. And so because I lived on the west side of Manhattan and had dark hair, they would say, like, are you Jewish? Because when I was growing up, New York was very much like west side Jewish, east side waspy. So I was confused, and my dad would laugh and be like, you're not Jewish, you're Arab. And I didn't know what that meant. And then I switched to a high school when I was 14 that had more Jewish people in it, and sort of started to come. As a child, I had really hid my identity because I was embarrassed. And I was born in 1974, and the civil war in Lebanon started about a year later. So right away, I had sort of figured out that like I maybe shouldn't talk about where I was from, because I could see that, ironically, given my dad's work, I was seeing these images on TV and what they were saying about Lebanese people and Arabs in general. And I realized that it was something maybe I should hide. So I did that. And then in high school, my dad had started being on TV a lot more. Because the first intifada had started in Palestine. That's when the kids were throwing stones at tanks. And so I sort of came out about my identity. Um, and I began to sort of be comfortable as who I was, especially because I could see that my dad was really just advocate. He was a very strong speaker, and he could make the most, um, you know, radical claim, not radical, but like the most straightforward claims, and give you the truth without backing down and without necessarily offending anybody, because he always relied on facts and information and history. And so he became a very well-known speaker and scholar of this subject. So I was constantly grappling with that. But for me as a person, I related more to my dad's literary work, because I was an my brother is a lawyer and majored in history, and he and my dad had this bond over talking about politics and stuff. And I just was more connected to my dad through our love of literature, so I could sort of avoid all of this stuff. But as I got older, it got harder for a variety of reasons. So I grew up in New York. So when 9/11 happened, I had just started acting. I'm an actress. And I had been basically perceived as sort of a white girl until 9/11. And then I sort of became a minority, like an Arab American was something I began to be called, and people started wanting to see work from Arab Americans in the wake of 9/11. So myself and 6 other actors formed a theater company and did a play in New York about what comes to mind when you hear the word Arab. And we interviewed all these people, and then we sort of did it like a documentary. So each actor plays a bunch of characters, and then you're sort of reciting word for word what the interviewer said. And so we realized that like all of the Arabs would say, when you ask them what comes to mind when you hear the word Arab, they would say love, food, family, home, safety. And the non-Arabs would say bombs, terrorists, sand, camels, all that stuff. From that group, I started to write my one-woman show, Palestine, which I worked on for like 7 or 8 years, doing a lot of readings to make sure that I didn't lose the audience. And when I did Palestine, a few years before, in 2006, I got caught in Lebanon in a war. So that was the second time in my life I'd had to escape Lebanon in a war. So between being American and being Palestinian and Arab, I'm always in the middle. And most of the friends I have from high school are Jewish. The neighborhood I live in has always been quite Jewish, and it's not really been an issue. So I felt like I've been blessed. I hate that word, but you know what I mean? Like, in a way, fortunate to have grown up knowing Jewish people and knowing a different world than just being closed in Palestine. So I turned my play into a book, a memoir that came out about 10 years ago. And now I feel like I was ahead of the curve and no one knows who I am. But I wrote a book called Looking for Palestine about all of this. And in both the play and the book, I'm very clear that I don't have an answer to what we should do and what should happen. But like my dad, I tended to focus on humanity. And he was
like focusing on what we have in common.
yeah, always. And that's how I've always
also been. Respecting differences, like
exactly. So, I can't speak to, I don't know I have no issue with Jews wanting to live in Israel, Palestine, whatever. My only issue, which is what I learned from my dad, is first of all, everyone is a human being and you have to engage with them that way and not make assumptions, which has been interesting in the wake of the recent events in Gaza. But also that my father would say it's far more interesting to try to learn to live together than to separate ourselves. And this is not just some genius idea he had, but you can see most of the conflicts in our lifetimes and our parents' lifetimes were based on, you know, you can't live here because you're not this, you have to leave. And, you know, nationalism and ethno-national and all these things. And so, and colonialism. So I think that, and also having a wife, my mother from Lebanon, and seeing how Lebanon was divided into these sects, and then all they do is fight, and there's really no um, way to come together sometimes because everyone wants to be on their own team. And so that's another interesting thing, is that my dad is sort of, his work is sort of um,
Hmm.
credited for like inventing political correctness, not inventing, but helping to, you know, not calling people certain things and making, you know, not saying Oriental, saying East Asian or West Asian, or, you know, instead of Oriental. Um, so, but the irony is he would always tell me, even before he died, and I went to college in the 90s when the whole like identity politics thing was very big. He was like, what, I think it's important to know who you are and stand for who you are, but to keep separating yourself, what does that do? You have to learn how to live together. And I think that's a lot of what we're seeing in the world right now is, you know, especially now, there's so much difference, even in an individual person's DNA. There's so much that this whole idea that only certain people can live in certain places and be, you know, certain ethnicities is just sort of ridiculous. So
And
that was a long, that was a long answer to your
oh no, that's
question.
fine. That's fine. Yeah, I usually like to kind of let them like see where it goes, like, and
Okay.
because like then sometimes I have multiple questions, and then like it's like then more than one question can kind of be answered. Yeah,
Okay, good.
but I guess to give a bit my background, like I'm not religious, but my mother is Jewish, but I never. It's been a couple son of generations since anyone practiced. I don't have like a personal connection to Israel. I do believe in a God, but it's more of like how everything's kind of divine, I guess is the way I'd say it. And I recently started looking into the mystical side of Judaism, like the Kabbalah and everything, kind of resonated with me. And I'm an actor as well. That's another.
Right. Which I knew.
But what I guess what I there's been a lot of like I feel like the media, it makes it hard to talk about this the way it's,
Yeah,
at least the way it's
very much.
portrayed, everything, because it's like I feel like, because to me there's no contradiction in saying that I condemn what happened on October 7th and the terrorist attacks, and also saying that I want Palestinians to be treated as equal. And I think it's horrible what's happening in Gaza, that it's sort of like a form of collective punishment, that they're all, being punished for what Hamas did. And like then they say, oh, that's self-defense. But it's like, if Canada, like if there was a terrorist from, like, I thought of this analogy, like if there were a terrorist group from New York City attacked Canada,
Mhm.
and
Right.
they were hiding in New York City among civilians, and then Canada like took its plane and like started
Yeah.
carpet bombing New York City. Like I don't think New
You
Yorkers.
can't go anywhere. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think that that's an important thing. First of all, Gaza, I've been there. So I think not a lot of people can say that. You can't even get in without UN assistance anyway. So um, I went there a long time ago, 1992, pre-Oslo, and it was not a fun place. It smelled of open sewage. People were lovely, human. No one was angry. And I mean, obviously we're Palestinian, but I mean, it wasn't what you think from what even then what the news would have said. They were just poor people. And I think it's really important that we kind of try to discuss the class issues here, because my family was able to leave because we were Christian and had money. My grandfather was a businessman.
so Christian Palestinians are treated a little better, would you say, than
No,
Muslims?
actually, this
Or
is
no?
interesting. It has to do with colonialism as well. So there's always been Christians, Muslims, and Jews in Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, Jordan, all of that area. Um, and my parents grew up with Jewish friends. It was more like Mizrahi Jews, like they were Lebanese or they were Syrian, but they were Jewish people that they went to school with, and all of that. But what happened is, yeah, so a lot of the schools in the Middle East and the universities were started by missionaries. These Christian missionaries who came from America and France and England, who literally came to the Middle East and were like, why are there already Christians here? Which is hilarious to Arabs, because we're like, well, because this is where Jesus is from. But they were surprised. And so what they did, instead of trying to convert us all to Christianity, was convert us to their sects. So that's why my family's Anglican. My dad's family's Anglican. I'm sure originally we were Greek Orthodox, but now we're Anglican because of the British mandate. My mom's family is Quaker, which is even weirder. So, and then they founded schools. And so these were schools, they're secular, like universities and schools. So most of those students have an easier time leaving because they're connected to a Western or a Christian. And then the other thing is, yes, at the beginning of, I think in 1948, or maybe it was later, I don't know, like, for example, Lebanon, which has a Christian majority by law, even though it's not really the majority anymore, they offered citizenship to Palestinian Christians who were leaving Palestine, but that's it. So you were at an advantage in certain ways, but you could have been a sort of upper middle class Muslim family and been able to get out as well. I think it's just some people were not able to leave. They had nowhere to go, or they got caught in some. And all of the people who were not able to leave Palestine were brought to places like Gaza. Gaza is not where most of these people are really from. And I think that's also important. And the other thing is, I'm surprised at how many people, including Jewish Americans, do not understand that you cannot leave Gaza. You are stuck.
And when I always mention that Israel's giving them warnings to leave and everything, but they can't just leave.
No, and I was in Beirut in 2006, and they sent us warning leaflets from the sky that they were going to bomb us. But you actually, it's like, I said this, it's psychological torture. You laugh maniacally because you're like, well, where am I supposed to go? So I was in Beirut, which is a city, which, again, like you said, so just to go back to Gaza for a second, it's the most densely populated area in the world. It's not a big space. There's no way that you can, I mean, if they're human shields, it's by accident, a lot of it, because they're just living on top of each other. You cannot bomb a small area and pinpoint two people. So that's part of the problem. But in Beirut, they were doing this, and they had bombed the airport. And we were all waiting for the US embassy to put us on boats. And we were all doing our best to evacuate. But short of getting in a car and driving to Damascus, which is very risky, you can't leave when you're about to be bombed. So, and also, I really find it disgusting that people think it's nice that they tell us they're going to bomb us. It's so not, it's just so twisted.
It's like if Putin told the Ukrainians, like, I like warn them, oh, I'm about to bomb your
exactly
ship, you know.
So there's a lot of things about war once you've been in it that are very angering in terms of like the rules of engagement, in terms of like, so then when I did finally get on a convoy, we have like an Israeli plane flying, or the Lebanese army driving in front of us. Everybody's escorting us out safely. And I'm like, now you're cooperating? What the hell? It's so strange. So anyway, yeah, so the bombing, it's Gaza is not a place. And oh yeah, I was saying you can't leave. So a lot of people know that in 2005, Israel agreed to pull out of Gaza and not occupy Gaza anymore.
They still control the electricity and the water. And
thank you.
And then they're able to.
And then they put a blockade on Gaza. Yeah. They put a blockade on Gaza when Hamas was elected. So they've been punishing the people of Gaza since 2007, even though the official occupation ended, and they cannot get out. Their food is not, I mean, it's a very complicated situation. And also part of the reason like Egypt doesn't take them is because Arabs don't want them to leave Palestine because no one will let them back in. So to us, there's another, and not only that, Egypt has peace with Israel, so they're basically doing Israel. And so we're stuck in the middle. We have Arab governments and the Israeli government treating us like little nothing. And we're stuck in the middle. And these poor people in Gaza are just poor people. I mean,
Yeah.
they're just regular humans, really and truly.
Yeah, and then they try to say, like, oh, why don't they revolt against Hamas? But it's like, how are they supposed to?
Exactly. And another analogy I'll use for that is, we all watch and understand these movies about life in the inner city, or the ghetto. And in those films, we see very clearly that there'll be a kid who the only way to protect his family is to join the gang or sell the drugs or do the whatever. And Hamas provides social services to these people. So if they go against Hamas, they can't, they're screwed. They'll be, obviously in danger, in harm's way, but also they won't be able to protect their families. And I think that that's something that can't be forgotten. It's like being ruled by a gang. But that being said about Hamas, it also needs to be made clear that the imprisonment of these people in Gaza by Israel is the main issue. Not that Hamas is not an issue for them, but they wouldn't be stuck in there with Hamas without the fact that they're stuck in there. So that's all.
Yeah, and it's important to distinguish, Palestinians who want liberation, and like the majority of Palestinians.
I mean,
Hamas,
I
because
think
Hamas is
what's
just
been
an
interesting,
extremist.
yeah, what's been interesting about this last couple of weeks is all the noise from everybody who has an opinion. And it's maddening for a lot of us who follow this on a daily basis, because a lot of people believe certain myths about certain things and they want to believe them. And so you can give them facts and they still don't believe you. And it's very, very upsetting. But what is also amongst all the noise, what I've personally found is there's been some major issues I've had, and racism, I'm going to say clearly, from Jewish American, not all of them, a few Jewish Americans that I know. But in terms of the Israelis that I know, the conversations are humane and we always agree, because I think when you are someone who's directly affected on a day-to-day basis, or you really know what it's like, you and like, no matter your politics, I think most Palestinians just want to live and most Israelis just want to live. So I'm not sure how we'll get there, because it's really insidious. The amount of, like, the governments are insidious. America's supporting of the governments and some of their lies, and I'm talking about the Israeli government, but the Arab governments aren't very helpful either. I'm going to say that very clearly. So we're dealing with a lot of and then Hamas speaking for all of Palestinians. And I'm going to just reiterate that I am not religious, but my family is Christian. So Hamas doesn't really have my interest in mind, whether they pretend to or not. But at the same time, like, it's also just, it's just so angering, because like there's no way out, because based on like international law and all these rules of war, if you don't have a country and an insignia and have not agreed to engage, I don't know all of the things, but there are rules of war that make it so that whoever emerges to support Palestinians or fight for Palestinians will be labeled a terrorist group. So we're
Because,
sort
like I
of
said,
screwed all.
I don't think there's a contradiction in saying that, I denounce hatred of Jewish people
No, not at all. And
and
honestly,
crimes
I'm
against
a
Jews.
pacifist.
Yeah,
I'm a
because
pacifist. I
both
don't
go up.
want any of.
Yeah. Oh, because like
Yeah,
both,
no, there's two things.
yeah,
There's two things going on right now, and
yeah,
that they're connected, but they're not. The day that Hamas attacked Israel, I had posted information on what Hamas is and what Gaza is, because people were asking me. And then I was yelled at by Jewish friends because they were very traumatized in the moment, which I understand. And I apologize to them if they felt my timing was off. But one, I could see what was going to happen, and I could already hear the media. And I was like, if there's one thing I want to do, it's explain what Hamas is and what Gaza is, so people are at least operating from a somewhat informed perspective.
Not like
And
not, you didn't want them to blame all Middle Eastern people or all.
right, and a few of my friends got angry at me for that, and got angry at me for not posting an Israeli flag on my social media, which I don't think what you post on your social media is an indicator of your humanity or your feelings or it's sort of strange that that would be my official announcement to the world about how I feel about it.
Yeah, you can support innocent Israeli,
Yeah,
innocent
but also
Israeli and Jewish citizens. That doesn't mean you necessarily have to support their government. It's the same as
exactly,
like
and
support the
I am
right
a
for
humanist.
Palestinian.
Yeah, I am a humanist and a pacifist, and I've said that. So what upset me was that people who've known me forever expected me to denounce Hamas officially, as if I never had to denounce Al Qaeda or ISIS officially. I mean, it was clear that I don't agree with them because, one, again, I'm not Muslim, so I wouldn't be joining an Islamist group. And two, I'm not a liar. I am a humanist. I don't want people to die. I'm a pacifist. But I was attacked and many people thought I was condoning what Hamas did by providing information. And that made me very angry and very nervous, because that's when I realized that this situation was different from the last few incursions over the last few years. And it's been a lot uglier. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
well, but I did see like a couple people trying to condone like what did, but those weren't not most none of those people were like actual Palestinians, at least from the ones
Exactly.
I saw.
I think
They were like radical like left Americans that
right.
really didn't
So
know what they were talking about, and
there's two
kind of
things
equating
that,
Palestinian liberation with Hamas, which it isn't. Hamas isn't good for
right.
Palestinian borders. So.
That's something that's actually I wanted to mention too, because a friend of mine who's Jewish wrote to me and was like, keep seeing posts that seem to be like, it's almost like they, in parentheses, are writing, I don't mean to sound anti-Semitic, but Hamas has a point or something like that. And I wrote to her and I go, if you're friends with anyone who's defending Hamas, they are A, an Islamist, B, an anti-Semite, or C, a radical leftist who supports armed struggle. And she wrote me back and said, that's it, the third one. I have a lot of friends who are on the left, but I didn't realize. And I told her, yes, I understand that. I think that it's cool that young people are getting woke and all that. And I think that all of the social media activity is helping and great. But one thing I did learn from my dad was you got to keep focused on the task at hand, which is stopping the war right now. Okay. It's not about cheering for sides or whatever. It's about humanity.
Yeah.
We want to stop the war right now. And then that's what I was saying. Israelis, I know, whatever their politics, we all agree on that. This has to stop. Everyone's getting trauma. And I see trauma and I get upset.
Yeah. Well,
whether it's
also whenever this happened, whenever things like whenever this happens, hate crimes towards both Jews and Muslims. Well,
right.
Yeah.
So, and that's something I've had to deal with. The day that this happened, I teach Pilates for my day job, and one of my clients that I've taught for years, 3 times a week, messaged me that she'd seen my Facebook, and she's not even on Facebook. So she only saw like a public post, which I don't even know where it was, and that she didn't want to work with me ever again. And she signed her email with an Israeli flag emoji. And I've never been so scared in my life. And I was scared to even tell people, because I thought that they would say I was anti-Semitic for saying that she was mean to me, or that I wasn't allowed. There was a lot of me not being allowed to have feelings about what Hamas had done to Israelis. Like I was only allowed to feel sad for Israelis and Jewish people, and not have any emotion about the entire situation. So from a Palestinian perspective or an Arab perspective, we're like, oh no, shit, this is bad. This is what's going to happen. We're like, all these people in Gaza are about to get destroyed because I know Netanyahu is the prime minister.
Yeah.
So, but then I was getting personally, and a friend of mine told me he never wanted to speak to me again. And he said, it's not about you, which I found maddening because the fact that you just said it's not about me is the whole problem. So, and he's not even Israeli, he's American. He goes to Israel all the time. I can't go to Israel all the time, but I'm from there. So like the whole thing that he just pissed me off. So also, not for nothing, but my sister-in-law, her cousin, Shireen Abu Akleh, the journalist, was killed last year by an IDF soldier. And I didn't get an apology from any of my friends who support the IDF. So I was being yelled at by certain people for not reaching out to them and caring about their feelings when no one has ever done that to me.
Yeah.
When I've been bombed by Israel twice and I came home and nobody apologized. My dad's office was blown up when I was a kid by a right-wing Israeli group which is now part of the government in Israel. No one apologized to me for that. I don't equate any of them with the people who did these things to my family. And yet, as soon as this thing happened, I was sort of condemned for A, making it about me, and B, sharing information about Gaza and Hamas and what is going on there. So I felt like I'm not allowed to talk about being discriminated against or hurt. Because, and then the TV was like, oh, anti-Semitism. And yes, anti-Semites exist and always have existed and will always exist. And they will take this opportunity, I'm sure, maybe to do something bad, but that doesn't mean that people aren't doing it to Arabs as well. Yeah. And I think when our country is the one that is their biggest ally and is providing a lot of their weapons, most people are not on our side, And so I understand that anti-Semitism is a worry, but also anti-Arab and anti-Islamophobia has to be equally included in that, because as you saw, a little boy was killed in Chicago. There's all sorts of stuff going on. It's not just that, but I've been discriminated against, and that's never happened to me in my life because of who I am. And I was hurt by the person who fired me because I've done nothing but be human with her for every day that I've seen her forever. And there was nothing about my humanity that could override her ideology or beliefs, which were actually hurtful and in many ways inhumane. But I was too scared to tell anyone because I thought they'd get mad at me somehow and tell me I was anti-Semitic. That's the situation we find ourselves in. We have to be very careful everything we say. And it's frustrating, which, again, not to deny that anti-Semitism is very real and terrifying, but that's not necessarily A, coming from us, or B, or me, I'm just speak for myself, or B, like the only issue right now. So, and I think
that has to be equal concern for both Israeli lives and Jewish lives, and for Arabs and Palestinian lives too.
Because you're seeing people are getting, the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee has received more calls about this sort of thing than they did after 9/11. So yeah, social media makes a difference in that regard because people are getting harassed on social media. But there must be real life stuff too, because I don't think that these organizations can do anything about harassment on social media or the internet. So the complaints they're getting are, and I know personally some people who are getting in trouble at work because of their social media posts. And it upsets me because I think people don't know this, and I just want to say it. when we say free Palestine, we're sort of hearkening back to the Palestine that was before World War II, which was, yes, a British mandate, but it was a free state where every citizen had the same rights. We are not asking for Israel to go away. There are people who probably think that's what free Palestine means. Both people who say it and people who hear it who think that's not what it means. It means we want the people of Palestine to be free, and we want to live in a free place. The reason, and then they don't say free Israel because Israel doesn't include us. That's really all it is. And so then it looks like if you put an Israeli flag to us, it's a war thing. It's nationalist. And we see, okay, well, that's a flag that doesn't represent us. So I don't put flags. I didn't put up a Ukrainian flag. I don't do that. That's not something, because I know that a flag doesn't have anything to do with human beings. And so it's been frustrating trying to explain to people that it's not a war whether you put up an Israeli flag or a Palestinian flag. But however, if you do put up a Palestinian flag, you shouldn't be discriminated against more than someone who put up an Israeli flag. That's what I mean. I just find it really bizarre.
Yeah. Oh, it's actually since it's the free version, it has only like a 1-minute record, so we have to close out and come back in if that's
Okay.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
me talking too much.
Oh, no,
so it just comes back to the same link, right?
I think it's going to be a new link. Like
okay.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess that's the problem is I guess on both sides is the extremist element.
Yeah.
Because there's the far right in Israel that was there was that one group too that was shouting in the streets death to Arabs.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course then there's the Hamas saying that they want all Jews out. They're saying like they don't want Israel to exist so there'd be any Jews, but like then like the majority I think of both like regular Jews or Israelis and regular Palestinians just want to kind of just
I think also, I mean, what's upsetting right now is I completely understand. As a little while ago, I just noticed that someone I admire in a different world of one of my other interests that I follow on social media was posted a very long thing about how this is all she's going to say, but of course she can understand the pain of Gazans, but since they did what they did, they're animals and all this stuff. And I just unfollowed her. But I also am angry at people who, I understand that anger, but it has been a couple of weeks and now there's different things happening, and it is okay and it is possible to hold two people's pain at the same time. It is also possible for Palestinian. This is what my dad used to say. It is important and possible for Palestinians to know about the Holocaust and what Jewish people have been through. But it is also important for Jewish people to know what Palestinians have been through. And I think that's where there's a difference. It seems that we're not supposed to know that because it's not.
They act like one contradicts the other, but it doesn't.
And my father also used to say that no one has a monopoly on suffering. Like your pain is your pain. I mean, if one person you love is killed, that's enough. So it's not about, well, I lost 500 members of my family and I lost 300. It's just about like, okay, can we put this aside and move forward? And while I understand the rage on both sides, maybe it's different because we felt it so many times, but we know we have to keep going because usually we're not the ones instigating the attack. So, of course, I understand how a lot of people feel, but to not let go of the hate is what scares me. And I'm seeing that a little bit more this time around. And maybe it's because there's this idea that Israel is impenetrable because of the Iron Dome and all this stuff. But And I realize that that brings more terror, but the situation is still what the situation is. And if the goal is going to be that you just hate Arabs, then that what's or Israelis, I mean, what is that going to do? Or
Well,
Jews or
unfortunately, it's
whatever.
propaganda too, and like not like
Yeah.
I think you were saying earlier, not knowing it on a personal level, just the way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, you know, no Arab there has the same rights as any Jew. I mean, that's a fact. And a lot of people are like, but some are citizens of Israel. That doesn't mean they're treated the same way. I'm sorry. The Arab citizens of Israel are not necessarily. And by the way, nobody has mentioned them. I feel like there are plenty of Arabs in Israel proper who are probably scared. One of the hardest things when I was in Lebanon in 2006, Israel was bombing Lebanon, but there were people, but Hezbollah was fighting back, and there were people I know that are Arab that live in Haifa, right? So they're in the middle of it too. I mean, you don't know who lives where, who is, at the end of the day, like it's a small piece of area. I mean, it's a small area of land. Like
yeah, and there was
amount of stories and I'm sure a lot of maybe those people at the rave were working with Palestine. I don't know who anybody is. So we have to keep in mind that these are humans in every side. And I'm seeing humanization much more of the Israelis who are wounded and killed than I am of the Palestinians. And that's just a fact. And that's not fair.
well, yeah, like we
Children are
know their
a
names.
child is a child.
Yeah,
End of story.
yeah, like they say their names on the TV and everything,
Yeah.
and they should, but they should also say the same for the people in Gaza who are being killed, like the innocent.
Yeah, but let me just give you a bit of a difference of the idea of what it in Gaza. There are so many dead bodies under the rubble that it stinks of flesh and death everywhere. They're never going to get everyone's name, and they're writing dead children's names on their leg. It's not. It's again the. It's not to say that there's more people dying, so it's worse. It's just to say there's a huge difference between being the people who get named and being the people who are just statistics. And I think that that's important to note, that like it's not. Yes, of course you can't maybe count all the dead people, but that's also important. They don't have the resources or the help to get all the people safe, and so
Mhm.
it's just not fair in that way. And so those of us who are posting about Gaza are doing it so because the main stories you're hearing are not about Gazans as people. And so a lot of, I think, my Jewish acquaintances are getting annoyed or don't like to look at my social media. But I mean, I can only advocate for my own people, and I'm not going to sit here and be like, this is not who I am. I'm not going to pretend I'm not Palestinian. And I wouldn't, if my family hadn't been, as I said, of a certain class. But what I also wanted to say about my family and social class is that we are sort of almost inconvenient because we remind people that there was this whole society there. I think people like to believe that we've always just lived in poverty and we're backwards and all these things, when my family was very westernized. They dressed in Western clothes. They had houses and cars. They went to work in buildings. It was a real place. It was a society. And there were farmers and villagers and people in a different, social class or whatever. But it was a society. It wasn't just like a bunch of, barbarians sitting around eating their feet or whatever people want to think, so.
Yeah, well, and that's unfortunately ignorance, and I think that also happens with it's so people can kind of accept the war. I think that's
Right.
times of war too, is like dehumanization of whoever the enemy is.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, and that's also something that's been really scary a little bit, because it's like we didn't learn anything from 9/11. I mean, after 9/11, which was, as we all know, carried out by a terrorist group,
yeah, and then
um,
we invaded a country that had nothing.
another a different, Islamist group, and then we bombed Iraq and Afghanistan, and look what we've done. And in the years since, everyone has been angry. Why did we do this? There were no weapons of mass destruction. What did Saddam Hussein have anything to do with 9/11? Like, all of the things seem to be gone, and everyone's got their 9/11 brain back on, and they're like, kill them all. And I just don't, I think that's also a very American thing because we've never had war here. I mean, going back to what I said about Israelis and Palestinians,
Like
I
it's
think
easy to
anybody
support
who's,
war from a distance, and it's not as easy
yeah,
to
if you've
support when you're not
actually
there.
lived through war, it's the most, I mean, if you've never been in like fight or flight mode, you don't know what it is. But when you're surviving that way every single moment of the day, it's horrible. And bombs, like I said this in my book and my play, you can't replicate the sound of a bomb, no matter how hard you try,
Yeah.
because they're louder than anything you can imagine. And also, there's a psychological element of it being a bomb. So if it's not real, you also know it's not real. But when it is real, the terror is so intense. And I don't wish that on anybody. And whether it's a bomb or someone attacking you, in any other way, I wouldn't wish that on anyone. And nobody wants war who's been through war. And so I feel a bit frustrated at it's like a runaway train with everyone in America giving their opinion and the way we treat war like it's a video game and not a real human experience that no one should ever have to go through, let alone people who've only seen war their whole lives.
Yeah, and the U.S. hasn't seen anything like that since the Civil War.
Never.
Yeah, and that was
Yeah.
before anyone now is alive. So.
Very yeah. Yeah.
And so, as someone with a rich cultural background, what role does art, literature, and theater play in promoting understanding and bridging culture divides?
Well, I think it is. I mean, I think for those of us who do it, as you probably know, um, it helps me like deal with the trauma of it to talk about it. But it's also important in terms of finding a way for people to listen to you without and theater requires as you also probably know that you really, as I said, when I wrote my play, I did a bunch of developmental readings and took the notes of the audiences because it's a topic that people want to come in defensive about or want to turn off or don't. So I had to very carefully write what I wrote so that everyone would keep listening. And it did work, and it does work. I mean, I haven't done it since in the past 2 weeks, so I don't know. But I think that it's the amount of people I've been able to reach by just doing my performance of my play and just them seeing my humanity also has a huge, huge effect. Because as we all know, the best art is, I mean, it's specific stories, but the themes are always universal when people relate to them. And I've had people, my story is so complicated. I've already told you, like I'm not a typical Arab by any definition, right? I'm Christian, but like Quaker and Anglican. And my grandpa came to America and became a citizen and moved back. And my mom's family had a lot of people who had already come to America. And so we're very mixed and different, and European also. Lots of my family's in Europe. So I'm not a typical Arab, but I don't think there is a typical Arab, So we're 22 different countries, and we can't necessarily communicate because of all the dialects. And, we're different. We're all different people. So now I forgot what your
There's no like
question was.
monolith. That's what I always say. Like,
Yeah, there's no, there
monolith.
is not. And so art, you were asking about art. I think art is the way to just sort of be human. And one of the things I also love about art is I've had the opportunity to play Israeli characters. In fact, once I played an Israeli character who didn't like a Palestinian character. And that was a really good experience for me because the first rule of being an actor is you don't judge your character. So I had to find her truth, as we say. And this character had a personal situation that she was probably more upset about than the Palestinian person she was talking to. So it was just interesting for me because then you can also see that one body if I can play an Israeli and an Arab, then it just reminds people of humanity. Like,
yeah.
I can be all these people in one body.
Based on anybody could be you, just born in different circumstances.
Yeah,
different,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And even when we started talking, like I was able to, like, it's also like a thing you can find like a commonality with anyone. Like I was able to mention that I'm an actor as well. I'm like a
Yeah.
person. I write too. That's like another thing. So
Well, and that's also something that's been really interesting. It's like theater, everyone I know in the theater and art world has been really, really human about what's been happening, regardless of their politics. I think they've just been listening and reaching out and being kind, which I've noticed people who are more in the corporate world and whatever. I mean, even Hollywood is corporate to me. Like, it's much more, you have to take this line and then not say too much and not rock the boat. And if you do, then there's consequences. And I think that's what I love about the art and humanities and this whole world, is we can actually talk about the things that are uncomfortable and not necessarily agree or find any sort of anything, but have a human interaction. And that's particularly why I like theater the most personally. But I mean,
I think music kind
film
of,
is great because it reaches farther. It can reach more people. You know, there's different, yeah, in
in music
books.
too. Like people can come together, like
Yeah.
enjoy the same kind of music, and that's a great way to like unite. That's so I like people in the creative arts in general. I think kind of understand the common humanity more. Like
Yeah, because you're looking for connect humanity and universality. And whereas I think a lot of our world right now is like, are you this or are you that? Do you stand on this side or that side? And it's just, that's useless. It's not interesting, as my dad would say. It's much more interesting to live with people that challenge you and make you think. I mean, I don't know.
no, I agree, and like I said before, it's also like I feel like it's the media that kind of causes that
Yeah.
kind of thinking people. It's
But
how
we also,
it's how you
go ahead.
control people without like having to force it. Like you just like private.
Right. And our media in particular is runs on ratings. They like, they see the stories that people like and then they keep doing them. That's why we got 2 straight years of COVID every night, and then 2 straight years of Ukraine every night. Now we're probably gonna get 2 straight years of Gaza and Israel. So it's like, you don't even, my family in Lebanon has been living with almost no electricity, or all of Lebanon, for, I mean, they all have many people have generators, not all, for 2 years, and no, it's never been on the news. So there's, millions of things going on in the world that, there's Armenians are going through it right now too. And once again, the world doesn't know. So our media is not only very strange, but it's because it's sound bites and clips, and they can sort of reorient anything into whatever they want it to be. But it's also based on ratings, and that's just not. That's very strange. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of another thing that seems to bring in ratings is kind of like demonizing the other, like it's
Yeah.
us against them. If it's not like demonizing another racial group, it's like like the both political
Right.
affiliations are kind of in their echo chamber. Like this is what this bad side's is doing. That's what this bad.
Well,
But if you actually go out and talk to different people, you see that things aren't as like black and white, and that there's people with like very
right. And also, like, the first question they ask any of us who are Arab is, do you denounce Hamas? And it gets really annoying because it's not only is it, and then you have a 2-minute intro. So my dad at the end of his life stopped doing American television because they wanted a soundbite. And now we have social media, so it's even less than 2 minutes. It's like a 3 seconds. You've got to like explain everything. So he would only do if it was a long form interview, or if it was European press, because they give you more time to speak. And that's a problem we have in this country, is we get bored easily. I mean, look how many people are over this already and they've moved on. So I think it's unfortunate that the media doesn't even try to help us, and the people that do try are you know either ousted or given less time on air or whatever. So
And I remember I saw not too long ago that there was a Palestinian woman was interviewed on BBC, and he brought up he started the conversation that, will you denounce Hamas? And she responded with, I told you before not to ask a trap question. What to get a view like what she meant by like a trap question, and what you would say is wrong with starting the conversation with that.
First of all, they never ask the Israelis to denounce anybody. So
Yeah.
They ever say, do you denounce the occupation? Do you denounce the treatment of people? That's the first thing. And second of all, it's insulting to a human being who is civilized. I don't want to use that word. Insulting to a human being who is willing to discuss stuff with you, who does. I mean, if someone wants to proclaim
you're not going to go up to
loyalty
every
to
white
Hamas,
person. Yeah.
if someone wants to proclaim their loyalty to Hamas, they will, right? So I wouldn't, but yeah, and that's what I said. I wrote a Facebook thing about this. I said, if I want every American to denounce the KKK, the Proud Boys, every mass shooter ever, like, why is it because we're the same, like from the same background, we have to denounce violence? It should be clear that you're having a rational human being to have a conversation. They're not going to say, yeah, let's kill everybody. I mean, I don't.
Or as a Jew, if I don't denounce
the double standard of why they don't do that to others.
Yeah.
And it is essentially equating every Palestinian with Hamas. That's the other problem.
Yeah, and I just thought another one, like if somebody, like I told someone I'm Jewish or have a Jewish ancestry, like why don't you denounce Jeffrey Epstein? He was Jewish.
Exactly. That's what I said. We didn't start a whole thing in like Jeffrey Epstein. I said Harvey Weinstein, but same idea.
Yeah, and also, and then you were talking about your heritage a bit earlier. Another interesting layer to my heritage is that my dad's side's actually like more Germanic and German.
Oh, interesting.
And my mother's side's Russian and Lithuanian Jewish.
Oh, interesting.
Like those were kind of like, there was
that's
like
a big.
Yeah, but like I'm kind of like a product of, but so that kind of in some ways that perspective on it too. And I have a little bit of a Cherokee, like a couple generations.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
But like also like even if like the German side, like I don't think that it would be. I think it would be insulting to go up to a German person and say,
exactly, and say, do you denounce Hitler?
Yeah.
Or the Nazis? Yeah. I mean, I know that there are German people who carry that around because their grandfather, but I would never assume that of a German or ask that of a German because I'm talking to the person in front of me anyway. So it doesn't matter. If they start saying that they love Hitler, that's a different story. But yeah, I think it's just and when you're interviewing someone and you're interviewing them and you're sort of introducing them as like professor of blah blah blah, and then you're like, do you denounce? It's like it's insulting. It's not,
Yeah, I think there was a Pierce Morgan, like he's been bringing on like all different sides. He brings on
he has. I've seen
his bias is definitely more towards supporting the Israeli side. And I remember he brought on a guest who was Muslim, and then he introduced him as a controversial figure, and he's like, why are you introducing me like that? He goes, why don't you say I'm an Oxford graduate? Like he said, the others, like, aren't the others controversial? Like
well, that's what it's funny that you said that. My dad, his whole life and to this day, is described as being the controversial scholar, and I'm like, why was he controversial? Nobody read his books. The New York Post called him a terrorist, so everyone believed he was a terrorist. He, from the beginning of his career in the 70s and in the 80s and the 90s, all he ever did was stand up for Palestinian rights and point out what was happening in Israel that was unfair. And he always was a humanist, and he always stayed on the side of humanity. And he's never been connected to or associated with anything violent. And I just find it weird because I also feel like I have to keep, after what happened with Hamas, especially me, whose family has worked for peace, reconciliation, and humanism for all these years, I have to denounce Hamas. I've never said a word about violence or liking violence or wanting violence of any kind or wanting to kill anybody. So, even my dad still has this reputation as being controversial, which is like, you're telling me my father is controversial. First of all, you're talking about his views. And second of all, his views are reality. They're not views even. They're just facts that you don't know and you want to deny. So I really don't like that they use that word for us all the time. It's like your existence is we're inconvenient because we're Palestinian. It's like we can't not be what we are. And I'm not. I think some of my Jewish friends maybe expected me to post an Israeli flag, and that would be the most self-hating act. I can't wash off my Palestinianness. I don't.
And it's
I
like,
don't understand.
And I don't like how and I don't like, that's another thing, is like, I don't know I don't like how like Israel and like being Jewish is always so linked either. Like that's
Yeah,
become such a
there are
link.
plenty.
Like to
There
me, it's
are
like what
so many non-Zionist Jews. There are secular. I think that's also one of the differences. Is a lot of Israelis are secular, and a lot of American Jews are not. So um, that's part of the reason that sometimes talking to Israelis is a little easier. Um, but Arabs and are not responsible for the existential Jewish question of their homeland. I mean, it can be their homeland, but they have to share it. I mean, I there's something about the idea of giving Palestinians rights that seems threatening to their Jewish homeland, which I understand, but um, it can be, it's not an issue to us. Like it can still be your homeland and be ours too. Like I don't, but that's a very, I'm not Jewish. I don't understand you know,
there was also
what
like
they believe enough or what certain people believe enough to know that but I do know that Zionism was a political movement and not a religious one. And I'm not sure where that got lost.
yeah, and there was also like Middle Eastern Jews too, though, right? They were there.
Yeah. And let's talk about them for a second.
Yeah,
They're in the middle of this worse than anybody because they're not necessarily treated as, you know,
and I
they
know
don't get
Ethiopian Jews are kind of not treated.
exactly.
Yeah,
So Mizrahi Jews and Sephardic Mizrahi Jews being the ones that were Syrian or Yemeni or whatever Lebanese or there were Palestinian Jewish people because the country was called Palestine. They lived there. They were our people. They are our people. They're Arabs. They're from our countries. So for them, I think it's. I mean, I can't speak for an entire group of people, and I'm sure there's as many differences in that community as any other, but some of them grew up speaking Arabic and they don't necessarily feel that Arabs are different. I don't know. I have but then some of them are not. So it really also depends on your personal history, I think, too.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, because like me growing up in New Jersey, like it just doesn't make sense. Like that I would like somewhere I've never been to. I don't really have any real
Yeah.
ancestors. Like
Well, that's the thing for me. My Jewish friends always talk about Israel and my Jewish acquaintances, and I don't understand why they never thought twice about how it might make me feel because I can't really go there. I can't visit. My house was taken away. Like we have a house, we don't own it, but we do, right? So it was ours. We never sold it. They took it. So there, and it's right near Netanyahu's house, interestingly.
oh,
So, so yeah, I mean, right. I'm from West Jerusalem, which people always tell me, no, you mean you're from East Jerusalem? And I'm like, no, I'm from West Jerusalem. It was a city for for everybody then. It wasn't only the Arabs only live in East Jerusalem. So it was a Christian Palestinian neighborhood that is now an upper class Israeli neighborhood. That's what happened. I'm not lying to make people feel bad. This is just the reality.
yeah, and I think it was Netanyahu's ancestors actually were the more like right with like more radical ones back then
I don't
too.
know. I've heard so
I know
many.
there
I
was a
mean,
period they're like, yeah,
he has a brother who was like a war hero, and he has issues just because he was never as I don't know, and his brother died. I don't know. There's a whole. Everyone tells me all his psychological issues, but I don't know. I just think he's not a very nice person.
and I guess what would you like to see for the future? Like, is there any idea of like how things?
Well, I sort of echo what my dad said, which was I would like to see a binational state with everyone, Arab or Israeli, having equal rights. I don't think Israelis are going anywhere. I don't think they need to go anywhere or should go anywhere. That's their home, but it's our home too. And that's it. And my father used to say this to call for this binational state where everyone had equal rights. And then people would say, well, that's very utopian. And he would say, well, I'm not a politician. I'm not going to be the one to figure it out, but that's the only fair way. And that's sort of how I feel. If you want, I also, as I said, don't live there. If they want to find a way to make two states, that's fine. It just doesn't seem to work because you're constantly transferring people from where they live to another place. And if they try two states again, I'm sure Israelis will also have to be relocated. And I don't, know why we can't just all live there. It just seems very strange to me. But
I think the younger
again, I'm not
generation might.
Jewish. I think the younger generation does not want to live in, I mean, the world is not about, it's about inclusion and globalization. It's not about exclusion. Um, yeah, I think, the idea of like an ethno-nationalist state is sort of a problem, isn't it?
Because
Hasn't it been?
it's always at the expense of the minority, at the expense of something.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't, yeah. And it's not like if you're a Palestinian, you live there, one day you can maybe be a citizen. It's only if you happen to live in a certain area that is where you're allowed to be a citizen. So it's not like you can become a citizen if you're from Gaza. If you move, you can't move. You're stuck. They're all stuck. If you're on the West Bank, you're on the West Bank. And that's another thing I think people don't know. The separation wall that they built, it wasn't really to separate Israelis from Palestinians. It's really separated Palestinians from each other, so they can't have a cohesive, you know, uh,
Yeah, it's so like
can't like come
when they're
together. And
separated from
yeah,
other members of their family, and
yeah, and their families, exactly. Yeah,
so thank you. Yeah, thank you for coming on and
my
talking with me.
pleasure.
It's good. Yeah.
Of
Any
course.
I guess closing thoughts you'd like to say or anything? Yeah.
No, I just want to reiterate that I'm really pro humanity, and I really would like for everyone to be allowed to do and be and live the way they want. And um, but I don't think we can get there until we really look at what's in front of us, and really all of us just look at each other and see reality.
Yeah, and turn
That's
off
really
and
what's
maybe turn off like the TV and the all that,
yeah.
and actually
And
like go
also
out and speak to each other.
don't exactly.
Yeah.
And talk to a Palestinian. I mean, I think people are reaching out to their Jewish friends, which is great, but I think fewer people know a Palestinian or an Arab. But if you,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying Muslim because it's not really about that. That's another media thing. It's about people. So if you know someone who's Arab and any, if they're Egyptian or anything, just to have a conversation and humanize them, it
Yeah,
would be
and
great.
I actually had a few years ago. I had an Arab roommate for like 3 years. I actually told him about this interview. He wanted me to say hi to you and that he admires your father and everything.
Thank you.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
but
Cool.
it definitely opened like my eyes to a lot of things. Like I feel
We're
like we
actually like really, really, really loving people. And that's what's so sad is that we probably would have let them come live there with us if this hadn't been taken out of our hands by Europe. And, we're really loving people. And I don't think anybody knows that. So,
yeah, yeah. It's unfortunately, I guess, like then the media just they pick out the extremists and just show people that, and then
right.
people assume that's everything. It's just
Yeah.
like
And
not everybody in America is like a racist. Like,
exactly. And, my dad wrote Orientalism in 1978, and it's now 2023, and the media is still participating. He also wrote a book called Covering Islam about how the media shapes the narrative based on how they portray Muslims. And it was written like in the wake of the Iran hostage crisis.
yeah,
And still we're still doing it. So I think that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. And even though he has like this tremendous influence on the world, it's still not clear to a lot of people what's going on for real. So
yeah, and also an end to war and like I guess
no,
war.
war just should not
Yeah,
exist. We would have money to take care of each other. Like it
yeah,
would be so nice. We could have health insurance and like that would be great.
yeah, definitely.
And maybe one day Israel could not have so much um militarization because something will have shifted, I hope.
Yeah,
Who
we get
knows?
more like Jewish comedians and stuff. The better.
Exactly.
Yeah, like to me, that's our strength in like the Jewish heritage. Is like I just think of like Charlie Chaplin.
That's the Jewish heritage that I connected with as a teenager, and that's why they used to call me the Arab Sarah Silverman when I did stand up for 2 minutes of my life. But like, yeah, I love we're very similar. I love cultural connections like that. And an Arab mom is a Jewish mom. It's the same thing. Yeah.
Cool. Well, this has been a good chat. So
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.